Hello y'all and welcome to my channel. Let's enjoy the vibes and react to this video.
The hearing that stunned both Wall Street and hip-hop didn't begin with a gavel slam or a shouted objection. It began with a silence, the kind that falls when everyone realizes they're about to witness something that can't be taken back. On one side of the courtroom sat executives from Kraft Heinz, suits pressed, faces immobile. On the other, Kendrick Lamar's legal team, calm, watchful, with the quiet confidence of people who had rehearsed for a moment like this. At the center was a campaign that was never supposed to end up here. A 30-second ad, a verse, a brand trying to sound like the culture instead of selling to it. And suddenly, accusations that blurred the line between art and advertising, between creative freedom and corporate control. Fans were divided before the doors even opened. Some called it genius, others called it betrayal. This is what happens when corporations cosplay as culture, one viral tweet read. Another countered, this is what happens when culture finally gets paid. What no one expected was how deep it would go, into contracts few had seen, into boardrooms that preferred shadows, into the fragile boundary where authenticity meets commerce. Because once the documents surfaced, it became clear, this wasn't just about a rapper and a ketchup bottle. This was about who gets to speak, who gets to profit, and who pays when art and industry collide. The damage was done. The narrative had already escaped the hands of publicists and media strategists. The moment the internal emails hit the web, complete with timestamps, sender domains, and redlined lyric edits. What began as a slick advertising crossover between a legendary rapper and a household food brand twisted into something darker. A story of artistic coercion, legal gray zones, and a battle between voice and ownership. It was a single document that turned the tide. Obtained first by an anonymous source and later authenticated by two separate entertainment law firms, the PDF was titled Kraft XKL Final Deliverables V4. 7. It listed creative bullet points for the campaign. Most seemed standard. Brand tonality guidelines, approval workflows, social rollout calendar. But then, halfway down the page, under Artist Alignment, came a paragraph that sparked legal chaos. Talent is to provide revised lyrical content avoiding. Direct mention of systemic economic disparity, metaphors connoting extraction or consumption of culture language framing Kraft Heinz as taking or mining culture. The final line chilled many. Brand holds final approval on all verbal and visual assets. Artist voice to remain within agreed messaging tone. For Kendrick fans, this wasn't a branding misstep. It was a philosophical breach. The man who gave them to pimp a butterfly, section 80 and the Pulitzer-winning Damn, was now being boxed in by a condiment brand's risk mitigation team. Within 72 hours, the backlash was fully weaponized. A viral TikTok with over 1.2 likes titled, Ketchup Killed Conscious Rap, spliced Kendrick's Heinz adverse with old interview footage of him talking about artistic freedom. Twitter threads dissected the leaked documents like Talmudic scripture. One tweet simply read, they edited Kendrick's bars like he's a junior copywriter. And yet, beneath the online frenzy, more complex questions began brewing in the entertainment law world. Was this just standard brand protection? Or did Kraft Heinz overreach into the domain of authorship and speech? The paper trail that spoke louder than the campaign. To understand the legal weight of the Kendrick, Kraft Heinz drama, you have to understand one crucial concept in entertainment contracts: moral rights and final cut in creative collaborations. While these terms are more common in film, the music industry has long operated under a looser, but equally potent, idea that an artist owns not just their voice, but the meaning it carries. Especially when that artist is someone like Kendrick Lamar, whose lyrical content is considered not just branding, but political speech. In the advertising world, though, there's a different language: brand safety. According to an insider at WME familiar with brand-artist negotiations, the Kraft team's language wasn't unusual. Every brand wants to avoid backlash. You can't have a spokesperson biting the hand that feeds, even Kendrick Lamar. But the problem here was context and expectation. From what insiders now confirm, Kendrick's team believed he'd been brought in because of his lyrical boldness. Kraft Heinz had pitched the campaign as a new frontier in brand storytelling, a minimalist ad series where artists could explore the emotional memory of food in culture. No jingles, no brand slogans, just raw poetry. They wanted the verse, one source close to Kendrick said, but they didn't want the truth that came with it. Reportedly, Kendrick's first draft of the verse included lines referencing food deserts in Black communities, the co-opting of soul food imagery by white-owned brands, and a closing bar that likened ketchup to blood in a mason jar. It was that last line that allegedly caused what one Kraft exec described internally as a full-blown brand safety escalation. The company pushed back, hard, and according to sources close to the situation, Kendrick nearly walked. But what happened next pushed the situation into courtroom territory. When an edit request becomes a contract, breach the contract between Kendrick Lamar and Kraft Heinz, obtained by rolling wire under FOIA-adjacent mechanisms due to cross-corporate filing conflicts, shows a clause titled Creative Autonomy Guarantee. The clause reads, "Artist retains full creative control over lyrical content, subject only to limitations of legal liability and community standards as outlined in Addendum C." But Addendum C, redacted in the initial version, was later unsealed in court filings. It was just 4 words: no obscene or violent content, no mention of brand alignment, no mention of reframing social issues, no mention of pre-approval. So when the leaked emails showed Kraft executives flagging certain bars, suggesting softening language, and most critically, referring to Kendrick as a messaging asset, it no longer looked like a brand partnership. It looked like corporate censorship. "It crossed a line," said Marcia Salgado, a UCLA professor of entertainment law and expert in artist-corporation conflicts. If the artist has a creative autonomy clause and the brand exerts narrative control, you're no longer editing. You're violating the contract. And in California courts, where Kendrick's label and legal team filed their complaint, contract violations of this nature don't just risk civil damages. They risk reputational harm, which under certain clauses can elevate a case from breach to malicious interference. The internal split within Kendrick's team while the legal machinery spun into motion. Another fracture quietly formed, this time within Kendrick's inner circle. Sources tell us that Kendrick's longtime manager, Dave Free, had originally greenlit the Kraft Heinz campaign through PG Lang, believing it could be a new format for artist-led brand narratives. But as pushback mounted and fans began accusing Kendrick of selling out, pressure within the team reached a boil. Kendrick didn't want to sue. He wanted to walk away and write about it, one source claimed. But the team saw the leaks as reputation assassination. Reportedly, tensions grew between PG Lang and their legal representation over how hard to press Kraft Heinz. One email thread suggested hesitation over filing a full complaint, fearing retaliation in the form of ad industry blacklisting. Ironically, it was Kendrick himself who reportedly made the final call. Not because of money, not even because of branding, but because of the principle. He saw it as a precedent, the source continued. If they did this to him, what would they do to younger artists without his leverage? The trial that captivated culture, by the time the case reached public court in Los Angeles Superior Court's entertainment division, it had ballooned into something far larger than brand rights or artist clauses. It became about control. Voice, who owns the story and who gets to rewrite it. The opening statements from Kendrick's side were blistering. His attorney, civil rights and music industry litigator Maxwell Durand told the court, they wanted his voice, but they didn't want his truth. They wanted his name, but they didn't want his message. That's not collaboration. That's exploitation. Kraft Heinz's team, led by a rotating trio of PR-immune attorneys from a top Manhattan firm, stuck to brand logic. They argued, Kraft Heinz sought to align with meaningful storytelling. But there are lines that must be respected when aligning with global family-oriented products. The artist was never censored. He was given options. That phrase, given options, drew audible reactions in the gallery. More telling was the look on the judge's face. Judge Elena Voss, known for her sharp handling of copyright and creative control disputes, reportedly paused after the phrase and looked directly at the Kraft legal team before asking, do those options include speaking truthfully about systemic inequality? The question echoed louder than any verse. And this was only day one. The courtroom fell still after Judge Elena Voss's question echoed off the paneled walls. Do those options include speaking truthfully about systemic inequality? It was a question that wasn't rhetorical, but neither side seemed ready to answer it directly. Kraft Heinz's lead counsel shifted in his seat, glanced at his co-counsel, then gave the kind of non-committal response legal teams use to buy time when the air gets thin. Your Honor, we would argue that commercial messaging must remain sensitive to brand context. But the damage was done. The courtroom, already thick with industry observers, journalists, and a few thinly disguised executives from other labels and conglomerates, recognized what had just happened. Judge Voss wasn't simply asking for clarification. She was planting a flag. From that moment forward, this trial was no longer about a ketchup ad. It was about what happened when a corporation tried to own the voice of a Black artist known for disrupting systems, not upholding them. Kendrick Lamar himself had not been required to appear in person that day, but the weight of his absence was palpable. His legal team made sure the court knew he was watching. A brief statement from his side, read aloud by attorney Maxwell Durand, confirmed that Kendrick had no interest in monetary damages beyond what was already owed. My client seeks no damages above contractual violations, Durand said calmly, but he seeks a public record that makes clear what happened here was not creative alignment. It was redirection under pressure. The next witness, a junior creative director formerly contracted through an external agency to assist in brand, artist integration, brought the first real moment of audible shock. Under questioning, she described the internal tension in the days after Kendrick submitted his initial lyrics. There was panic, she said. They loved the cadence, the rhythm, but there were specific phrases that were flagged within 15 minutes of the first listening session. Durand leaned forward. What phrases? She hesitated, glanced at the Kraft Heinz team, then said quietly, one line in particular. Culture in a bottle, branded red, and sold back to the children it came from. That was the one that started the calls. Gasps whispered across the gallery. A few reporters typed feverishly. The line hadn't been included in the final ad, nor had it leaked before the hearing. It was, in essence, a raw Kendrick bar, elevated, scathing, poetic. And it hadn't been rejected for quality. It had been rejected because it made too many people in too many offices uncomfortable. She went on to describe a post-call meeting where an executive suggested rewriting the line to say culture in a rhythm instead. That's when the tone shifted, she said. That's when it went from collaboration to control. Kraft's attorneys pushed back hard during cross-examination, portraying the edits as standard practice for ensuring brand safety. They presented emails in which Kendrick's own camp had agreed to review revisions in the spirit of partnership. But those same emails under redirect revealed subtle shifts, phrases like in the interest of alignment, as mutually beneficial, and critically, pending review by Kraft's risk team. By day 3, the court was packed to capacity. Even streaming feeds set up in overflow rooms were filled. Students from USC's Good School of Law, rising music artists, independent label owners, and media personalities all packed in to see what was no longer being referred to as a hearing, but as a reckoning. One of the most impactful moments came when Kendrick's longtime audio engineer, who'd worked on every album since Good Kid, M.A.A.D. City, took the stand. He wasn't there to testify about contracts or corporate policy. He was there to talk about Kendrick's creative process. Calmly, methodically, he explained how Kendrick writes. He writes from silence, he said. He needs the space to ask dangerous questions. When you interrupt that with pre-cleared messaging, you're not editing, you're censoring. Durand followed up with a single question. Have you ever seen Kendrick alter a verse under corporate pressure? The engineer paused, then said, not until this campaign. Kraft's team attempted to undermine his credibility, pointing to his role as a creative loyalist, a term their strategy seemed to hinge on. But when Judge Voss asked if the witness was compensated directly by Kendrick, the answer was no. I'm compensated by the label, he said, not him. The tension outside the courtroom was now as dramatic as within. Music blogs speculated on the long-term effects of the case. Artists like J. Cole, SZA, and even Travis Scott posted cryptic support on social media. A tweet from SZA simply read, I know exactly what this is. And in an especially dramatic twist, Drake, never one to miss a subliminal opportunity, posted an Instagram story of ketchup on a paper plate with the caption, "Red Table Talk." Media outlets took that as a jab, not just at Kraft, but at Kendrick himself. The post went viral within minutes. Red Table rap trended worldwide, but nothing cut deeper than what happened on day 5. Kendrick appeared in person. Clad in all black, flanked by 2 members of his legal team, he entered quietly and sat in the gallery behind his attorneys. The courtroom shifted its energy the moment he arrived. Jurors subtly straightened their posture. The judge acknowledged his presence but didn't indulge it. Yet everyone knew the room now belonged to him. Durand requested to enter into evidence a recorded phone call between Kendrick and Kraft Heinz's senior marketing VP. The defense objected on grounds of privacy and consent, but Judge Voss overruled. The call, previously sealed, was now public record. In the audio, Kendrick is calm, measured, respectful, but firm. "I appreciate the opportunity," he says, "but if I'm showing up with my voice, I'm bringing all of it." There's a pause on the other end, then the VP says, "We just want to ensure the messaging doesn't alienate family consumers." Kendrick replies, "My family's been alienated since before you had a slogan." The room went still. The tape ended. The defense looked shaken. For the first time, Kraft Heinz seemed visibly cornered. Their PR team released a statement by the end of the day reaffirming their respect for artistic expression. But the court of public opinion had already begun to turn. News segments debated whether this case would change the way brands work with artists. Spotify executives privately discussed halting a forthcoming Kraft Heinz playlist campaign featuring the ad soundtrack. Meanwhile, Kendrick left the courthouse without speaking to press. But he left having said more than anyone could have with a microphone. As the trial entered recess, one truth became clear. This case wasn't just about a bottle of ketchup or even a contract. It was about how the voice of Black creativity is still being negotiated, redlined, and sanitized by the boardrooms that claim to amplify it. And Kendrick. He had made sure that negotiation, usually buried in NDAs and silent compromises, was being dragged, lyric by lyric, into the light. Court resumed the following Monday under a different kind of pressure. The building was surrounded by media vans and independent streamers holding smartphones above heads like antennae searching for signal. Inside, the mood had shifted. The early days of procedural formality had given way to a trial that now pulsed with cultural significance. This wasn't Kraft Heinz versus Kendrick Lamar anymore. It was corporate language on trial. It was the hidden machinery of branded influence under the microscope. And in the gallery, something else had changed too. More rappers, more label reps, even 2 mid-level ad executives from competing food brands sitting quietly in the back row, taking mental notes on what not to do. As Judge Voss entered, everyone
This wind is insane. Feels exactly like White House Survivor.
rose. Kendrick wasn't in the room this time. His seat was empty, but it didn't matter. His presence still hung in the air. People weren't waiting to see if he'd speak. They were now watching who would try to speak for him and how badly that would backfire. The next witness was called. Dr. Chloe Renner, a linguistics professor specializing in semiotics and branded language, flown in from NYU. She had been contracted as an independent expert to evaluate the implications of Kraft Heinz's requested changes to Kendrick's original verse. Her testimony would become one of the most dissected elements of the entire trial. She began calmly, almost academically. She explained how language carries layers of encoded meaning, particularly when deployed by artists known for social commentary. She compared Kendrick's original lyrics to their Kraft-revised counterparts, drawing parallels to cultural sanitization in post-civil rights advertising. Durand handed her a printout. "Can you read the original line and then the proposed revision?" She nodded. Red on the table, red on the line was rewritten as red on the plate, flavor divine. "From your expert perspective," Durand asked, "what is the difference?" She didn't hesitate. The original line invokes danger, duality, and sacrifice. The revision is wordplay stripped of subtext. It replaces the tension of being consumed with the joy of consumption. There were murmurs. Kraft's legal team shifted uncomfortably. The implications were now more than clear. The brand hadn't just tried to shape a verse, they tried to anesthetize it. On cross-examination, Kraft's attorneys tried to frame Renner's analysis as speculative. Wouldn't you agree that art is subjective, that multiple interpretations can exist at once? Renner nodded but countered, interpretation may be subjective, redaction is not. That phrase, redaction is not, would become a headline quote within the hour. Then came the witness no one expected. Jonathan Crane, a former Kraft Heinz marketing strategist who had worked on early phases of the Kendrick campaign but resigned midway through. His appearance was unannounced, his name not on the original witness list. The defense immediately objected, citing a lack of disclosure. But Duran produced a time-stamped communication showing Crane had reached out directly to Kendrick's team only days prior, offering voluntary testimony. Judge Voss allowed it. Crane took the stand looking like he hadn't slept in weeks. Pale, rumpled suit, hands shaking slightly. But his voice was clear. He testified that in early internal brand meetings, the idea of recruiting Kendrick was met with hesitation from the legal team. There were concerns about his unpredictability, he said. But the CMO at the time said, and I quote, "If we lock his name down, the culture will eat it up no matter what he says." Durand leaned forward. So you're saying the company was betting more on Kendrick's brand than his message? Absolutely, Crane replied. There was never a serious intention to let him say something unfiltered. The courtroom fell silent again. Crane went on to describe an internal Slack message thread where campaign planners joked about Kendricking the brand meaning, giving it aesthetic depth without actually changing the corporate ethos. Screenshots of that thread, later admitted into evidence, showed emojis and mock lyric rewrites posted during work hours. One message read, "He can write about pain, we'll bottle the vibe." It was damning. Crane closed his testimony by saying, "I don't hate Kraft Heinz. I just didn't sign up to be part of cultural laundering." When court adjourned that day, Kraft's entire PR division launched into crisis mode. An emergency brand statement was issued that evening denying all misconduct, reiterating their deep respect for artist-led partnerships, and claiming they never sought to censor Kendrick Lamar's voice. But by then, the headlines had already written themselves. CNN ran a segment titled "The Case of the Sanitized Voice." Complex dropped an exposé called "Who Owns the Culture Now?" Meanwhile, Kendrick remained silent. But PG Lang's social media posted a stark black image with one white sentence: "Power is knowing when not to speak." The final days of testimony focused on damages and fallout. Kendrick's legal team emphasized that the campaign's edits diluted his credibility, not just in the eyes of fans, but within the art world. Durand referenced think pieces that had questioned whether Kendrick had gone corporate, and how long-term damage to an artist's message could never be undone once seeded into public discourse. Kraft Heinz pushed back, arguing that Kendrick had final review on the campaign, and his team's signature on the edited version implied consent. They brought in a music marketing consultant who testified that brand-aligned editing is standard, and no one was forced to approve anything. But the consultant admitted under oath that she had never worked with an artist who had won a Pulitzer for a rap album. The room bristled. Closing arguments came the following day. Durand stood tall in front of the jury. This isn't just about ketchup, and it isn't just about Kendrick. It's about whether art has the right to resist repackaging. It's about what happens when a voice trusted by millions is used to sell something and edited to silence something else. The moment you alter a message to protect a brand, it ceases to be the artist's. It becomes yours. He paused, and that's what they tried to buy, not his verse, his authority. Kraft's lead attorney delivered a steadier, less emotional close. He emphasized business reality. This was a partnership, with guidelines, with revisions that were agreed upon. If we punish brands for partnering with artists, we risk removing artists from the table entirely. But that was the problem. No one in the room believed Kendrick had been sitting at a table. They believed he had been placed on one. As the jury exited to deliberate, Judge Voss remained still. She tapped her pen 3 times, then stood. This case, whatever the ruling, will be studied in classrooms for years. I hope everyone here understands why. The deliberation didn't last long. 12 hours later, the jury returned. The courtroom was silent, but outside, the world was already spinning. Camera crews refreshed live feeds, Reddit threads pulsed with second-by-second speculation, and the words "jury has returned" flashed across every entertainment and legal tabloid site within minutes. Inside, the 12 jurors filed back in, faces unreadable, some blinking hard, others stone-faced. Kendrick Lamar was again absent, watching remotely according to his counsel. But the weight of his presence was everywhere. In the journalists' anticipation, the tightened shoulders of the Kraft Heinz legal team, and in the eyes of Judge Elena Voss, who knew she was about to preside over a ruling that would outlive the corporate interests in the room. Foreman Juror Number 6 stood. A man in his late 40s, formerly in music retail distribution, according to court documents. He held the envelope like it contained not just a verdict, but a shift in power. "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Kendrick Lamar Duckworth," he read, "on the basis of breach of contract and intentional interference with protected creative expression." The courtroom didn't explode, not yet. It froze. Then the murmurs began, first in the press row, then across the gallery. One of Kraft Heinz's lawyers sank slightly into their chair. Another began flipping through a legal pad, already preparing for appeal. On Kendrick's side, no fist pumps, no cheers, just a slow exhale from Maxwell Durand as he nodded and placed both palms flat on the table. Judge Voss requested the damages be read. "We award the plaintiff compensatory damages in the amount of $36 million, the foreman said, and punitive damages in the amount of $12 million. This time, the explosion happened. Reporters scrambled for live tweets, microphones were nearly knocked over, and even a few jurors glanced around, stunned at the weight of what they had just agreed to. But Judge Voss wasn't done. She motioned for silence, then leaned slightly forward, eyes focused on the room's center. "This ruling," she said, "is a recognition not just of financial harm, but of the harm that comes when institutions assume they can control an artist's message through economic leverage. It is not a punishment for collaboration. It is a warning against misusing it." No one moved. She looked directly at Kraft Heinz's lead attorney. "I suggest your client begins revisiting the language it uses in future agreements." The court adjourned, and as the room began to dissolve into activity, the real shock hit, not from the ruling, but from what happened next. As part of post-trial disclosures, Judge Voss unsealed an appendix to the original contract that neither side had publicly referenced throughout proceedings. Addendum D, until that moment, most believed the agreement ended with Addendum C, where only a vague clause restricted obscene or violent content. But Addendum D, marked confidential and flagged as draft only, not for distribution, had somehow remained buried, perhaps even overlooked by Kraft's own attorneys during initial discovery. But it was there, in the system, time-stamped, and legally binding due to an electronic sign-off from both parties. Addendum D was only 2 pages long, but its contents would spark another explosion in the media before the ink on the verdict dried. It was a provision drafted by Kendrick's team that outlined a creative integrity trigger. The clause granted Kendrick the right to withdraw his name and likeness from any campaign if, in his legal team's assessment, the final product materially altered or softened intentional socio-political commentary present in the original draft. Essentially, if his message was tampered with, he could pull out entirely without financial penalty. But the clause had never been invoked. Why? Because Kraft Heinz had never disclosed the final edited campaign video for sign-off before launch. They had gone live under the assumption that prior approvals held, an assumption that would now cost them millions and potentially more in brand value. Legal analysts pounced on this. "This wasn't just breach," said Lionel McKinnon, a former in-house counsel at Sony Music turned industry watchdog. "This was a textbook example of a company treating an artist like a plug-in instead of a partner." Within hours of the unsealing, Kraft Heinz issued a terse, carefully worded response. "We acknowledge the court's ruling and will comply with all legal outcomes. We remain committed to creative partnerships that honor all voices." But the fallout was already spreading beyond court filings and PR statements. 2 high-profile brands that had signed off on artist collaborations in recent months, Pepsi and Nike, reportedly held emergency internal reviews of all their entertainment contracts. An unnamed beverage brand was rumored to have quietly canceled a spoken word campaign featuring another major rapper, fearing similar backlash. The cultural world, meanwhile, had already anointed Kendrick's court victory as something larger. Black Twitter called it the authorship verdict. Think pieces flooded in by the dozens. Podcasts dissected every quote from Judge Voss. Editorials declared that the trial had created a new precedent for how brands navigate artistry. And then came Kendrick's response. 3 days later, he uploaded a short video titled Red Ink. No announcement, no rollout, just a Vimeo link posted at midnight on PG Lang's homepage. The video was shot in black and white. Kendrick stood in front of an old brick wall tagged with faint graffiti, no logo in sight, no color, only his voice. "Sometimes silence ain't retreat," he said in the opening line. "It's resistance in a quieter form." Over a minute and a half, he delivered what critics would later call a spoken-word closing argument, not just against Kraft Heinz, but against the system that led to the courtroom in the first place. "I don't rap for safety, I don't barter with fear. If I speak for my people, let it land crystal clear. You can bottle the flavor, but not where it's from. I'm the pulse in the silence, I don't rap for a crumb." No beat, no hook, just words. By the following morning, the video had over 4-5 million views, with screen recordings reposted across every platform. The top YouTube comment summed up the sentiment in 10 words. He took their courtroom and turned it into a verse. Kraft Heinz tried to hold ground. They pivoted messaging. They released a new ad campaign focused on communal food memories, entirely devoid of voiceovers or lyrical content. But the damage lingered. The Kendrick campaign, once hailed as brand brilliance, was now the centerpiece of every advertising school's cautionary tale. A month later, at a private industry panel, a former Kraft board member admitted off the record, "We thought we bought the culture. We didn't realize the culture kept the receipt." And Kendrick, he didn't file another lawsuit. He didn't run a media tour. He returned to the studio. But insiders whispered about what he was working on. A new record, one that would reportedly begin with a sample of Judge Voss's gavel hitting wood. What began as a 30-second catch-up ad ended in a courtroom battle that rewrote the rules of collaboration, consent, and creative control. Kendrick Lamar didn't just win a legal case, he ignited a reckoning, one that forced brands to reconsider how they speak with culture instead of through it. One that showed the world that even the most powerful corporations can't purchase integrity in a bundle deal. But the questions left behind are louder than the verdict. What happens the next time an artist signs onto a brand deal? Will they demand their own addendum D? Will brands learn to respect message as much as reach? Or will they return to safer, sanitized campaigns, stripping art of meaning to avoid controversy? And what about the artists without Kendrick's leverage? The younger voices? The next wave of truth-tellers? If this case taught us anything, it's that power isn't just about platform, it's about precedent. Because if Kendrick had walked away quietly, this would have just been another buried misstep. Instead, it became history. So now we ask you, was Kraft Heinz in the wrong? Did Kendrick overreach? Should brands have the right to shape the message when they're footing the bill, or should the message always belong to the messenger?
Alright y'all, thanks for taking the time to spend with me. Remember to like, comment and subscribe. I love y'all and I will see you in the next one.